There are moments in life when we come across signs, small ones, almost invisible, yet carrying an enormous power to transform everything. A stare that won't let go, a presence that cannot be explained, a silence that speaks louder than 1,000 words. It is not coincidence, it is destiny finding a way to remind us that even in the loneliest of days, there is still purpose. That's exactly what happened to George, an old man, worn down by loneliness, used to walking home with nothing but his own shadow, until one night he heard footsteps behind him. It wasn't a person, it was a stray dog, thin, persistent, as if he had chosen to follow George for no apparent reason. But there was a reason, there always is, and here lies the reflection. Often, what we try hardest to push away is exactly what we need the most. The evening sky was painted in orange and gold. Trees stretched long shadows over the dirt road, and the air carried the scent of dry leaves, cold wind, and silence. George walked slowly, his weight leaning on a worn-out cane, his tired eyes reflecting the heaviness of a lifetime. To anyone watching, just an old man returning home. But inside, there was much more. There was loneliness. That night, however, everything would change. George felt a rustle behind him. He turned slowly, and there he was, a dog, thin, dirty fur, sharp eyes, standing just a few feet away. He didn't bark, he didn't move, he just watched. George muttered, "What do you want, huh? Go away. Find somewhere else." But the dog didn't move. He wagged his tail, as if he understood every word, and still, he chose to stay. At every corner, the dog kept pace. If George stopped, he stopped. If George walked faster, he followed faster. And suddenly, the man who had always walked alone was no longer alone. It felt like life had sent him a disguised companion, a reminder that no one goes through their days without some kind of presence. George sighed deeply as he reached his gate, tried to convince himself it was just chance. But when he closed the gate behind him, he felt something different. For the first time in years, someone was waiting outside, inside the house. The silence seemed even heavier. George dropped his cane against the wall, sank into the old leather chair. The house felt frozen in time, old furniture, heavy curtains, the smell of a past that would never return. On the wall, photographs, a younger George, smiling with his wife, two small children playing under the summer sun. George ran his fingers across the dusty glass, whispered, "If only you were still here, maybe things would be different." A sound interrupted the silence, a low bark, insistent, almost like a call. He pulled the curtain open. There he was again. The dog, sitting, eyes fixed on him. "Don't look at me like that. I can't take care of you. I can barely take care of myself." Yet, something in those eyes was different, as if the dog was asking silently, "What if you are not as alone as you think?" George turned away, poured himself reheated coffee, sat again, tried to ignore, but those eyes stayed in his mind. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Half dreams, half memories. He remembered his little boy begging every week, "Dad, can we have a dog?" And his answer was always the same, "No, too much work." Now, lying in his cold bed, George wondered if he had been wrong. Maybe this dog was life's way of sending back what he once refused. Before closing his eyes, he looked out one last time. The dog was still there, lying on the ground, eyes alert, guarding the house. George felt a tightness in his chest. He told himself, tomorrow he'll be gone. But deep down, he knew, some presences don't leave that easily. The next morning, George opened the door slowly, hoping not to find him, but there he was, same place, same look. When George appeared, the dog rose, wagged his tail softly, as if saying, "I knew you'd come." George grumbled, "Still here? Don't you have anywhere better to go? On the way to the market, the dog followed again, always keeping a respectful distance. At the store, the shopkeeper smiled. That one's already yours, George. Dogs choose us, not the other way around. George muttered, pretending not to care, but inside his heart beat differently. Strange, almost uncomfortable, knowing someone was waiting for him outside. Days passed. The routine repeated. George left, the dog followed. George came back. The dog lay on the porch. One cold night, George gave in, placed a plate of food near the gate, pretended to be distracted, but watched from afar. The dog ate everything, grateful eyes shining. Soon, George began talking to him. "You don't give up, huh? I told you I can't, but you insist." And without noticing, that silent dialogue started to fill his days. Nights were not as lonely anymore. He caught himself waiting for the soft sound of the dog settling into sleep by the door. Each time he looked into those eyes, memories surfaced. His son asking for a dog, his cold refusal. Now, those same eyes offered him a chance to make peace with his past, to accept the gift he once rejected. But when the bond was beginning to grow, life tested them both in a way George could never imagine. That night, George prepared soup. Distracted, he left the stove on, sat in his chair, and fell asleep. Outside, the dog rested on the porch, but his ears twitched. Alert, the smell of smoke came first, then the crackle of fire. The flames began to spread in the kitchen. The dog jumped up, sniffed the air, barked, louder, faster, scratched the door, beat it with his paws. Inside, George coughed in his sleep, the air heavy, smoke filling the room. The dog forced the door open, ran inside, through heat and smoke. He barked by George's side, pulled at his pants, until George opened his eyes, confused, dizzy. What's going on? His legs failed him. The dog pulled harder, dragged him, insisted. George understood he had to follow. With effort, he leaned on the dog, as if the animal were a living cane. Step by step, they crossed the smoky room until they reached the door and finally, fresh air. George collapsed on the steps of the porch, heart racing, chest burning. Beside him, the dog panted, exhausted, but still there. George cried. For the first time in years, he cried. He hugged the dog. You saved me." The dog wagged his tail, as if saying, "That's why I stayed." That night, George understood. Their meeting was never chance. The next morning, sunlight filled the room. The smell of smoke still lingered. George turned his head. The dog lay sleeping on the floor, peaceful. George smiled. "You didn't follow me by accident. Maybe it was me who needed you all along." The dog lifted his head, placed his nose gently on George's lap. George caressed his rough fur, a simple gesture. But it healed wounds he didn't even know were open. Inside, he felt lighter. Not just gratitude, but purpose. For the first time in a long time, he had a reason to wake up. He sighed, leaning back in his chair on the porch. The dog sat beside him, both looking out at the horizon. The message was clear. He was no longer alone, and never would be again. The days that followed were different, completely different. The once silent house now had life. Every morning, the sound of paws, the bark that seemed to say, "Wake up, the day has begun." George smiled, a smile of disbelief, surprised by simple details he had once ignored. Loneliness no longer had space. The dog was with him at every step. To the market, to the park bench. Neighbors noticed. "George looks different, lighter," and he was. There was something new in his eyes, a sparkle unseen for years. One day, a neighbor asked, "What's his name?" George looked at the dog, thought for a moment, and answered firmly, "Hope, that's what he gave me." The name fit perfectly, because that was exactly it, Hope. The dog wagged his tail, as if sealing the silent pact between them. That afternoon, they walked together down the dirt road, side by side. The sunset painted the sky in gold and orange. Their shadows stretched long, until they looked like one. George breathed deeply, eyes filled with tears, and thought, maybe I haven't lost everything. Maybe life still has something left for me. And there, in that simple scene, was the greatest miracle. Love can appear when we least expect it, and often it comes in silence. On 4 paws. Have you ever lived something like this? A moment when an animal changed your life? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might inspire many others, and if this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and join us in spreading these stories that truly mark us, because in the end, it's not just about them, it's about us.